I landed the job on a Tuesday, which should have been my first clue. Nothing good has ever happened to me on a Tuesday. The ad for the position was vague. Caretaker needed for remote chapel, it read. Remote, sure, I thought, probably quaint. A nice quiet place to clear my head after my less than amicable divorce. The drive out to the chapel should have been my second clue. It was a 3-hour slog from my apartment in the city, the last 40 minutes of which was just twisting dirt roads lined with trees so thick you'd swear they were plotting to topple over and trap you there. I remember pulling up to the place and thinking someone's idea of a joke was pretty twisted. The chapel was nothing more than a sagging wooden structure, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, surrounded by an unruly graveyard where the headstones tilted as if trying to escape the earth. The surrounding woods seemed to press in close, the trees gnarled like arthritic hands. Keith, the church's sole administrator, met me outside. He was a lanky man, teeth like a row of uneven tombstones, with a handshake that felt like dry twigs snapping in my hand. Our conversation was brief, unsettlingly practical. "You the new guy, Ethan, right?" he said, eyeing my compact car with something like disdain. "You'll stay in the cottage just behind the chapel. It's more comfortable than it looks. Although comfort is a relative term out here." The cottage was a generous description. It was a one-room setup with a bed, a hurrying toilet, and a wood stove that looked older than the chapel. Keith handed me a slip of yellowed paper, the type you peel off a legal pad. "Your responsibilities mostly straightforward. Keep the place from falling apart. Check the grounds, keep critters out, usual caretaker stuff." He paused, scratching his chin before turning to leave. "Almost forgot," he said, half over his shoulder, "the rules. Here's a tip. If your job comes with a handwritten list of rules, run. Here's what mine said. 1. Always lock the chapel door at 7 p.m., not a minute later. It doesn't matter if you hear something inside, lock the door. 2. Never go into the basement of the chapel. It's old and not stable. Ignore any sounds from there after sunset. 3. If you see lights in the forest, do not investigate. Go to your cottage and stay inside until sunrise. 4. The clock in the chapel runs 15 minutes slow. Never correct it. 5. If anyone asks you to deliver a message to the patron under the oldest oak in the graveyard at midnight, politely refuse. Ridiculous, right? I smiled when Keith left, figuring him for a quaint sort of prankster preying on the city guy. But that night, I found rule number 1 rubbing uncomfortably against my mind. It was a cloudy night, the moon a forgotten thought behind thick clouds, leaving the chapel and its surroundings drowned in an inky sort of darkness. Armed with a flashlight, I performed my last duty of the day, walking toward the chapel. 7 p.m. I was about to lock up when I heard it, a soft rustling like pages of a book flipping in a breeze. But every window was closed. I hesitated, hand on the lock, the inkling of unease creeping up my spine. "Probably just a rat," I muttered, securing the door. I turned to walk back to the cottage when the sensation of being watched crawled over me. I flashed the light over the graveyard, but saw nothing besides shifting shadows and wavering mist. When I turned back, my foot caught on something soft, something wrong. I panned the flashlight down. There, half buried under fallen leaves, was a doll. A porcelain doll, cheeks eerily rosy against its cracked face, eyes unblinking, staring up at me. Swallowing the unease, I picked it up, figuring some child must have left it behind, until I realized I hadn't seen a single visitor all day. Had it been there during my earlier rounds? I couldn't remember. But standing there, under the overbearing silence of the trees, the air chilling around me as if the night itself were breathing down my neck, it suddenly felt very important that I couldn't. I put the doll in my pocket, its cold little eyes pressing into my thigh, and hurried back to the relative safety of my cottage, the rules burning a hole in my pocket along with the unsettling gaze of the doll. As I approached my door, I froze. From behind me, from the chapel, just barely perceptible, I could have sworn I heard the echo of laughter, soft, joyless, and terminating abruptly as if snipped by scissors. I blinked into the growing dusk, convincing myself that the laughter had been the wind or a bird, maybe even my own rattled nerves playing tricks. But the sound didn't fit any of those rational explanations. It was too distinctly human, too eerie. Shaking slightly, I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before finally managing to unlock the door. The warmth of the cottage did nothing to thaw the chill that had settled in my bones. Inside, I tossed the keys on the small top. By the door, the dolls weighed a constant reminder in my pocket. I was drawn to the hearth, needing the comfort of light and warmth. My hands trembled as I struck matches, cursing softly under my breath with each failed attempt. Once the fire was lit, the shadows danced across the walls, transforming familiar furniture into looming specters. I watched, transfixed, until the flames settled into a soothing rhythm. I pulled the doll from my pocket then, setting it on the mantel where I could see it, and where it could see nothing. As I prepared a simple dinner, the rules I had dismissed earlier nagged at me. They were now sprawled on the kitchen table, a list of do's and don'ts that seemed ridiculous in the light of day, but sinister come nightfall. Do not leave the doll alone in the dark, one warned. A silly rule, surely, but my gaze swept involuntarily to the firelit mantel. Another read, always lock your doors at night. They like to wander. They, the plural, startled me. Was there more than one doll, or was it something else implied? I pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the mechanical motion of chopping vegetables. Yet, every sound seemed amplified, the knife's rhythmic chop, the wood settling, the faint whisper of wind against the window pane. Or was it whispering through the keyhole? I froze, a carrot half sliced under my blade. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered to myself. But no sooner had the words left my lips than I heard it, soft, insidious, that same laughter drifting in, not like a memory but as something living, breathing just outside my window. My heart pulsed wildly, the knife slipping from my fingers and clattering to the floor. I crept to the window, heart in my throat, and eased the curtain aside just a crack. Nothing but the gnarled shapes of the garden's bushes greeted me, writhing slightly in the soft wind, the moon, a ghoulish overseer casting eerie shadows across the lawn. I saw nothing unusual, but the chill on the back of my neck told me I was not alone. Pressing my back against the wall, I slid down until I was sitting, my breath the only sound. Even the wind seemed to hold its whisper. When I had calmed slightly, the rational part of my mind urged me to inspect the cottage, to lock every window and door thoroughly. I moved mechanically, securing each potential ingress with meticulous care, avoiding any mirrors, another rule, unexplained but clearly stated. I tried to settle into bed, the doll now on the dresser facing away from me. Sleep, however, eluded me. Every creak, every sigh of the house had me clutching the blanket tighter. And then, in the midst of the silence, a soft thud came from the living room. Like something small but heavy had been dropped or had jumped down. I was out of bed before I thought about it, the list of rules clutched in one hand, my other searching blindly for a weapon. A small, decorative candlestick would have to suffice. The fire had long since died, and the cottage was clothed in oppressive darkness as I edged back into the living room. I strained my ears, every sense on high alert. There by the mantel where I'd left the doll was a shape. Bigger than the doll, darker, a blot against the lesser darkness. My breath hitched, and I remembered too late another rule, the simplest of them: never look them in the eyes. As if sensing my realization, the shape moved, a slow, deliberate motion, tilting as though could it be. It was looking up right at me. My legs felt suddenly weak, my grip on the candlestick faltering. The shape didn't charge or disappear. It simply stood, waiting, as if it knew all the power it held was in its presence, in the primal fear it inspired. With a dread-filled heart, I backed away slowly, the rules crumpling in my sweaty grip, every instinct screaming to not break the gaze that I couldn't even see. Only when I reached the perceived safety of my room did I dare turn and flee back into it, slamming the door shut behind me. From the other side, so faintly it might have been my imagination, came the soft, joyless laughter once again. My fingers trembled against the old wooden door, the laughter a chilling caress against my ears, and I fought the sudden urge to tear it open and confront whatever hell lay beyond. But fear glued me in place, my breath held hostage in my constricted lungs. A sense of suffocation filled the claustrophobic hallway as the echoes of mirth faded, devoured by an oppressive silence. I should have left then, should have listened to the screaming instinct to flee this house and its phantom sounds. But something about the faded wallpaper, the way it peeled like dry, flaking skin, kept me rooted. The house was suffering, holding on to memories that weren't mine, resonating with an agony I felt compelled to understand, or perhaps to end. Moving away from the door, I convinced myself the sound was just the house settling, a mocking trick of the old architecture. I navigated through the dim corridor, or my feeble flashlight casting long, sinister shadows that twisted and swayed as if breathing. The air was thick, tasting stale and ancient on my tongue, like swallowing dust from long-sealed crypts. As I progressed, the laughter seemed to morph and mutate, a reminder that my ears might not be trustworthy guardians of reality here. Was I just unsettling the quiet house, or was it unsettling me? Each soft creak and groan beneath my hesitant steps seemed to answer, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Reaching the living room, the change was palpable. The air felt denser, charged with an electric anticipation, as though the room were holding its breath, watching me with unseen eyes. My own eyes darted across the shadows, half expecting to catch sight of whatever had laughed. The furniture was draped in white sheets, making each piece resemble silent, shrouded figures frozen mid-motion. The softest of drafts fluttered one of the sheets, and for a heart-stopping second, I imagined I saw it breathe, its edges lifting like a chest rising and falling with a shallow, dreadful rhythm. I scanned the room, desperate to latch onto anything normal, anything that would anchor me back to reality. But my gaze caught the fireplace, where a collection of photo frames sat facing outwards. Drawn in by a curiosity stronger than my fear, I approached, wiping a film of grime off the glass with my sleeve. The faces looking back were hollow-cheeked, eyes too large, smiles too tight. These people, trapped in their frames, seemed imbued with an emotion I couldn't quite place, like joy strangled by despair. A family portrait where everyone is told to smile right after hearing a terrible secret. Their expressions now seemed to mock my intrusion, as if I was the interloper in some grotesque tableau. Then, all at once, the temperature dropped. A coldness seeped into my bones, and I shivered, glancing over my shoulder, feeling observed, judged. The light from my flashlight dimmed, then flickered violently, casting frantic shadows that leaped across the walls as if dancing to silent, dissonant music. Panic pressed down on me, a heavy, suffocating cloak of dread. I stumbled backwards from the fireplace, the movement hasty and uncalculated. My heel caught on the edge of a rug, sending me sprawling backwards, my breath knocked from me as I collided with the cold, hard floor. As I lay there, the room spun lazily around me, the ceiling a shifting kaleidoscope of shadow and fading light. The laughter returned, louder this time, close enough that I could almost feel the breath of it tickling my ears. It was no longer a distant sound, but an intimate whisper, as if from someone lying just beside me. Frozen, I turned my head slowly towards the sound. What I saw next imprinted itself on my mind with horrific clarity. A figure, sheet draped like the furniture, sitting upright from what should have been an inanimate pile on the adjacent chair. The sheet fell slightly away to reveal the palest hint of a grin, too wide, too knowing. My scream was a silent gush of air, my body too stunned to obey any impulse, but to freeze and stare as the figure slowly, with unnatural patience, began to pull away the rest of the sheet, revealing more of its impossible smile. The flashlight flickered once more, a final gasp of light, before surrendering completely to the devouring darkness. In the stifling claustrophobia of the dark, every remaining sense seemed to sharpen in protest against the smothered gaze. Somewhere in the depths of my petrified stance, the floorboards whined under subtle shifts that weren't my own. My breath hitched, struggling in a throat dry and constricted with dread. The air felt thick, charged with a chilling foreboding that made the small hairs on the nape of my neck dance in mute alarm. The palpable sense of another presence, almost breathing down my neck, was undeniable now. The darkness seemed to pulsate with silent laughter, a mocking tone to the increasingly apparent absurdity of my frozen fear. The smell of decay, faint yet distinctly unnatural, mingled with the stale air, pressing against the walls of the room as though it too sought escape. I tried to will my limbs to move, to break the spell of immobilization, but they betrayed me, soaked in a cold sweat of primal terror. Instead, it was the whisper of movement from just beyond the sliver of moonlight that crept through the slender gap in the curtains that drew a ragged gasp from me. The figure, or whatever it was, moved with a slow deliberation, a predator confident in its hunt, reveling in the prolonged terror of its prey. I could hear the softest scraping, like dried leaves dragged across a forgotten attic floor, as it moved closer. As the room seemed to contract, squeezed by the thick shadows, the edges of reality blurred briefly. My mind, in its frantic search for logic, dared to hope that perhaps it was all a grotesque trick of the imagination. Yet, the undeniable truth of the situation etched itself across my consciousness when the figure stopped abruptly, as though aware of my wavering resolve. What loomed in the gloom was worse than any detailed horror my mind could conjure. The moonlight slid over what seemed to be a myriad of grotesquely elongated fingers, the tips brushing the floor with a soft, sinister hiss. The body, if that term could even apply, was draped in what appeared to be thick, tattered cloth soaked in time and grime, swaying gently as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. But it was the face, or its excuse, that held my gaze in boundless horror. Where eyes should have been, only deeper shadows gaped back, and that smile too wide, too knowing seemed to pulse with a dark light of its own. A sound escaped me, something between a whimper and a plea, cracking the frozen silence. The figure stirred, head tilting in a parody of curiosity, the corners of its ghastly smile twitching with a grotesque mirth. My heart thundered a desperate rhythm against the cage of my ribs, each beat screaming for action. Gathering a shard of courage from the very brink of despair, I moved. The action was clumsy, more stumble than stride, but it broke the spell chaining me to the spot. I lurched toward the door, hands outstretched and fumbling in the oppressive dark. Behind me, the sound of dragging cloth and quickening whispers filled the air, a cacophony that urged my heart to riotous panic. The door handle felt icy beneath my sweat-slick palm, a small victory that my mind barely registered as I threw my weight against the door, spilling out into the less suffocating darkness of the hallway. The relative safety of the hallway offered no true solace, as the sound of that thing's movement haunted each frantic step I took, echoing in a symphony of nightmares just shadows away. Risking a glance back, I caught a slice of the moon's betrayal, a beam illuminating the relentless pursuer, still smiling, still without malice, yet filled with an intent that was unmistakably sinister. The sight fueled my limbs, lending a feverish speed to my escape as I turned corner after corner in a blind, desperate flee. Whispers seemed to catch at my heels, pulling at the edges of sanity. Each shadow appeared ready to burst forth with unspeakable horrors. Doors I passed seemed to groan with secrets better left undiscovered. But I would not stop, not even as a chilling breeze brushed my neck, or when my runner's instinct mistakenly guided me into an icy, tightening grip.